It was a cold Thursday afternoon in the heart of London. The kind of day where the sky looked like dirty cotton and the wind cut right through your jacket no matter how thick it was. People moved fast through the train station, heads down, earbuds in, lost in their own little worlds. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody smiled. Everyone had somewhere to be, and they were already running late. The station was one of those grand old buildings with high ceilings and stone floors that echoed every footstep. Thousands of people passed through it every single day. Businessmen in expensive suits, students with heavy backpacks, mothers pushing strollers, tourists dragging suitcases and looking confused at the departure boards. It was the kind of place where you could stand in a crowd of hundreds and still feel completely alone. In one corner of the main hall, pushed up against a pillar like it had been forgotten there, sat an old upright piano. It was part of a program the city had started a few years back. The idea was simple. Put pianos in public places and let anyone play them. Give people a moment of unexpected beauty in their busy days. Sometimes it worked. A talented stranger would sit down and fill the station with music. People would stop and smile and remember that life could still surprise them. But most of the time, the piano just sat there collecting dust. Or worse, someone would bang on the keys like a child, making noise that drove everyone crazy. On this particular afternoon, a small crowd had gathered near a coffee stand. A train had been delayed, and people were killing time, scrolling through their phones, sipping overpriced lattes, complaining to each other about the wait. Nobody was paying attention to the piano. Nobody noticed when a figure slowly made his way toward it. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, though it was hard to tell. His face was weathered, lined with deep creases that told stories of years spent somewhere difficult. His hair was gray and uncombed, sticking out in odd directions like he had slept outside. He wore a long coat that had seen better days. It was brown once, probably, but now it was faded and stained, with one of the buttons missing. His trousers were wrinkled and too big for him, held up by a belt that had extra holes punched into it. His shoes were the worst part. Old sneakers, the kind you might find in a donation bin. With the soles peeling away and the laces mismatched, he walked with a slight shuffle, like his feet hurt or his legs were tired. He carried a plastic bag in one hand, the kind you get from grocery stores, and it looked like it held everything he owned. A few people glanced at him and then quickly looked away. You know that look. The one where you see someone who looks like they might ask you for money. You pretend to be very interested in your phone. That was the look he got. Over and over again, a security guard near the entrance noticed him and watched carefully. Not approaching yet, but ready to. Ready to tell him to move along if he caused any trouble. Ready to protect the respectable people from having to deal with someone who made them uncomfortable just by existing. The man didn't seem to notice any of this. Or if he did, he didn't show it. He just kept shuffling forward, his eyes fixed on something ahead. The piano. A group of teenagers stood nearby, 4 of them, probably around 16 or 17 years old. They were loud in that way teenagers often are, laughing at videos on their phones, pushing each other playfully, completely unaware of how much space they took up in the world. One of them, a boy with headphones around his neck, noticed the old man approaching the piano and nudged his friend. "Look at this guy," he said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "He's going to play the piano." His friends turned to look, and a few of them started laughing. "This should be good," one of the girls said, pulling out her phone. "I'm recording this." They weren't being cruel exactly. Not in their minds, anyway. They were just bored teenagers looking for entertainment. To them, this was funny. An old homeless-looking man about to embarrass himself on a public piano. They had already written the story in their heads. He would sit down, bang on a few keys, maybe try to play something and fail miserably, and they would have a video to share with their friends. Something to laugh about later. A woman in a business suit walked past, talking loudly into her phone about a meeting that had gone wrong. She barely glanced at the man, but when she did, her face twisted into something like disgust. She walked faster, putting distance between herself and him, as if poverty might be contagious. A mother with 2 young children steered them away, pulling them closer to her like the man might be dangerous. He wasn't doing anything. He was just walking. But she had already decided what kind of person he was based on how he looked. We all do it. We pretend we don't, but we do. The man reached the piano and stood there for a moment, looking at it. Just looking. His plastic bag hung at his side, rustling slightly in the draft from the station doors. The teenagers had their phones up now, recording, waiting for the comedy to begin. A few other people had noticed too, watching from a safe distance with expressions that ranged from pity to annoyance. Then he sat down. He lowered himself onto the bench slowly, carefully, like someone who knew exactly how he wanted to position himself. He placed his plastic bag on the floor beside him, tucking it close to his feet, and then he did something that surprised a few of the people watching. He adjusted the bench. He slid it back just a few inches, testing the distance from the keys, moving it again until it was exactly right. It was such a small thing, but there was something deliberate about it. Something practiced. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, they dismissed it. What did it matter how he sat? He was still just a homeless man about to make a fool of himself. The teenagers were giggling now, elbowing each other, ready for the show. One of them made a comment about how bad this was going to be. Another said something about the smell, even though they were too far away to smell anything. They were performing for each other as much as they were watching him. The security guard had moved a little closer, still watching. Ready to step in if the man caused a scene? Ready to escort him out if the playing was too bad or too loud or if anyone complained? That was his job after all. Keeping things orderly. Keeping people comfortable. Keeping the undesirable elements out of sight, the man sat perfectly still on the bench. His hands rested on his thighs, not on the keys yet. He seemed to be taking a moment, breathing, centering himself. His eyes were closed, and his face had gone calm, almost peaceful. Like he had left the noisy station behind and gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere only he could go. A few seconds passed, then a few more. The teenagers started to get impatient. "Come on, old-timer," one of them called out. "Play something." More laughter. A few people shook their heads and walked away, deciding the show wasn't worth waiting for. The businesswoman had long since disappeared into the crowd. The mother and her children were gone too. Only the curious remained. The ones who had nothing better to do. The ones who wanted to see what would happen next. The man opened his eyes. He looked down at the keys in front of him. 88 of them, stretching out in their familiar pattern of black and white. He had seen keys like these 1,000 times before. Maybe 1,000,000. They were old friends. They were home. He raised his hands slowly, almost ceremonially, and held them just above the keyboard. His fingers were long and thin, the knuckles swollen with age, the skin rough and dry. They did not look like the hands of a musician. They looked like the hands of someone who had worked hard labor all his life. Someone who had struggled. Someone who had known pain. The teenagers kept recording. The security guard kept watching. The crowd kept waiting, and then, in that busy, noisy, indifferent train station, surrounded by people who had already decided he was nothing, the man began to play. The first note hit the air like a drop of rain in a desert, soft, clear, perfect. It hung there for just a moment, vibrating through the station, cutting through the noise of rolling suitcases and distant announcements and 100 conversations happening all at once. And then came the second note, and the third, and suddenly, the train station was not a train station. Anymore, it was something else entirely. The man's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. His hands, those rough and weathered hands that looked like they belonged to a construction worker or a farmer, danced over the piano like they had been born there. The music that poured out was not the clumsy banging everyone had expected. It was not some simple tune played badly by someone who barely knew what they were doing. It was Chopin, one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano, and he was playing it like it was as easy as breathing. The teenagers stopped laughing. The boy with the headphones around his neck let his mouth fall open. The girl who had been recording lowered her phone for a second, then raised it again with a completely different expression on her face. This was not the video she had expected to capture. This was not a joke. This was something she had never seen before in her life. The music swelled and filled every corner of the station. It bounced off the high stone ceilings and wrapped around the pillars and found its way into the ears of every single person within 100 meters. People stopped walking. Just stopped right in the middle of where they were going and turned to look. A businessman who had been practically running to catch his train slowed down, then stopped completely, his expensive briefcase hanging forgotten at his side. A young woman with bright red hair and a nose ring stood frozen near a newsstand, her eyes wide. Her coffee growing cold in her hand, it was like someone had pressed pause on the entire world. The security guard, who had been watching so carefully, ready to throw the man out at the first sign of trouble, now stood with his arms at his sides and a look on his face that was hard to read. Surprise, maybe? Or something deeper, something like shame. He had been so sure he knew what was about to happen. He had been so ready to treat this man like a problem that needed to be removed. And now, here he was, listening to the most beautiful music he had ever heard in his life, coming from the very person he had been ready to dismiss. More people gathered. They came from everywhere. From the coffee stand and the ticket machines and the platforms where trains were waiting. They formed a circle around the piano, keeping a respectful distance, not wanting to disturb whatever magic was happening. Some of them pulled out their phones to record. Others just stood and listened, not wanting anything between themselves and the music. An elderly woman near the front had tears running down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She just let them fall, her hands clasped together in front of her chest like she was praying. Maybe she was. Maybe the music had touched something inside her that she thought was gone forever. A memory, a feeling, a person she used to be, or a person she used to love. The man at the piano seemed completely unaware of the crowd. His eyes were half closed, his body swaying gently with the rhythm of the music. He was somewhere else now, somewhere far away from this cold train station and these strangers and the life that had brought him to this moment. He was inside the music, living in it, letting it carry him wherever it wanted to go. His fingers flew over the keys during the fast passages, hitting every note with impossible precision. Then they slowed down for the gentle parts, drawing out each sound like honey dripping from a spoon. The contrast was breathtaking. Power and softness. Storm and calm. It was like watching someone paint a masterpiece in real time, each stroke perfect, its color exactly where it needed to be. The teenagers had gone completely quiet now. The boy with the headphones had moved closer, pushing through the crowd to get a better view. His face had changed. The smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. He was 17 years old and thought he knew everything about the world, but right now, watching this old man in his tattered coat create something so impossibly beautiful, he realized he knew nothing at all. One of his friends, the girl who had made the comment about recording the embarrassment, now had her phone pointed at the piano with shaking hands. She was crying too, though she would probably deny it later. The music had snuck past all her defenses, all her teenage coolness, and found the soft human heart that beat underneath. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, had escaped from his mother's grip and pushed his way to the very front of the crowd. He sat down cross-legged on the cold stone floor, his chin in his hands, staring up at the man like he was looking at a superhero. His mother started to pull him back, then stopped herself. She knelt down beside him instead, putting her arm around his small shoulders, and watched with him. The piece built toward its climax. The notes came faster and faster, tumbling over each other like water rushing over rocks. The man's whole body was involved now, leaning into the piano, his shoulders rising and falling with the intensity of the music. Sweat had appeared on his forehead despite the cold. His gray hair, so wild and unkempt, fell across his face, and he did not bother to push it away. Nothing mattered except the music. Nothing existed except this moment. And then it happened. The passage that separates the amateurs from the masters. A section so technically difficult that most pianists practice it for years and still cannot get it right. His hands split apart, the left playing a completely different rhythm from the right, both of them moving at a speed that seemed humanly impossible. and he did not miss a single note. Not one. A man near the back of the crowd, a music teacher who had been teaching piano for over 30 years, felt his knees go weak. He knew what he was witnessing. He knew how rare this was. He had heard professional recordings of this piece hundreds of times, attended concerts in the finest halls in Europe, and what he was hearing right now, in this dirty train station from this homeless-looking stranger, was better than almost all of them. The crowd had grown to over 100 people now, maybe more. They stood in a giant semicircle around the piano, packed so tightly that newcomers had to stand on their toes to see. The noise of the station had faded away almost completely. Even the announcements seemed quieter. As if the station itself was listening, a train arrived on one of the platforms and passengers poured out, confused by the crowd blocking their path. But instead of pushing through impatiently, most of them stopped too. They heard the music and they understood that something special was happening. Even if they did not know what it was, the businessman who had stopped earlier was still standing there. His train had come and gone. He had missed it completely, and he did not care. There would be another train. There would always be another train. But there might never be another moment like this one. The music began to slow. The storm was passing. The final section approached, gentle and sad and achingly beautiful. The man's fingers moved more softly now, drawing out each note like a goodbye, like a prayer, like the last words of a letter to someone you love. The crowd held its breath. No one moved. No one whispered. The only sound in that vast station was the piano and the music, pouring out of it, and the soft shuffling of the man's worn-out shoes on the pedals below. He played the final. Notes, slow, deliberate, each one placed with perfect care, like setting precious stones into a crown. The last chord hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, vibrating, fading, dying away into silence, and then it was over. The man's hands came to rest on his thighs. His eyes stayed closed for a moment longer. He was still somewhere else, still lost in whatever place the music had taken him. The crowd stood frozen, afraid to break the spell. Then someone started clapping. It was the little boy at the front, the one who had escaped from his mother. His small hands came together with enthusiasm, and his face was split by a huge grin. He did not know he was supposed to wait. He did not know anything about concert etiquette or proper behavior. He just knew he had heard something wonderful, and he wanted to show his appreciation. His clapping broke the dam. Suddenly, everyone was applauding. The sound erupted through the station like thunder, bouncing off the walls and the ceiling and filling every inch of space. People cheered. People whistled. People wiped tears from their faces and clapped until their hands hurt. The man at the piano finally opened his eyes. He looked up at the crowd like he was seeing them for the first time, like he had forgotten they were there. A small smile crossed his weathered face, shy and surprised, as if he could not quite believe what was happening. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever. The applause kept going. It rolled through the station in waves, rising and falling, but never quite stopping. People who had not even seen the performance, but heard the clapping from across the station, came over to find out what was happening. The crowd had grown so large now that it was blocking several pathways and causing a minor traffic jam near the ticket gates. Nobody seemed to care. The man sat at the piano bench, looking slightly overwhelmed. He nodded his head in a small bow, the kind of gesture that seemed automatic, like something he had done 1,000 times before. His cheeks had gone red, though whether from the effort of playing or from the attention, it was hard to say. He reached down and picked up his plastic bag, holding it close to his chest like a child holding a favorite toy. People started moving toward him. They wanted to shake his hand. They wanted to tell him how beautiful that was. They wanted to know who he was and where he came from and how. Someone who looked like he slept on park benches could play, like he belonged in the grandest concert halls in the world. The teenager who had been so ready to mock him pushed through the crowd. The boy with the headphones around his neck, he looked different now, smaller somehow, like the arrogance had been drained out of him and what was left was just a kid who had learned something important about making assumptions. He stopped a few feet away from the piano bench, not quite sure what to say that was. He started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. That was incredible. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. We were laughing at you before and I'm sorry. The old man looked at him with kind eyes. There was no anger in his face. No resentment. Just a gentle understanding. Like he had seen this 100 times before and knew that people could not help the way they judged others. It's all right, son, he said. His voice was soft and warm, with an accent that was hard to place. Eastern European, maybe, smoothed out by years of living elsewhere. You are young. The young always think they know what they are looking at. It takes time to learn that the eyes can lie. The teenager nodded, blinking back something that might have been tears. He stuck out his hand awkwardly. The man took it and shook it once, firmly but gently, then let go. The boy stepped back into the crowd, rejoining his friends who all looked equally shaken. More people came forward. An elderly woman, the one who had been crying during the performance, took both of his hands in hers and held them tightly. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. My husband used to play that piece. He passed away 3 years ago, and I haven't been able to listen to it since. But hearing you play it just now, it was like he was here again. Just for a moment. Thank you for giving me that. The man's eyes softened. He patted her hands gently and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Whatever it was, it made her smile through her tears. She nodded and stepped away, peering into the crowd with her hand pressed over her heart. The security guard had made his way to the front now. He stood there looking uncomfortable, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyes on the ground. When he finally looked up, his face was full of something complicated. Guilt, maybe, or embarrassment. Sir, he said, clearing his throat, I owe you an apology. I was watching you before you sat down. I was ready to ask you to leave if you caused any problems. I had already decided what kind of person you were. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry. The old man tilted his head slightly, studying the guard's face. You were doing your job, he said simply. People in uniforms have to make quick decisions. It is not easy, but maybe next time you wait a little longer before deciding. Sometimes the best things come from the places you least expect. The guard nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill, holding it out toward the man. Please, he said, take this. Get yourself something warm to eat. For a moment, something flickered across the old man's face. Amusement, maybe? Or irony? He looked at the money, then back at the guard, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That is very kind of you, he said. But I think maybe you should keep it. Buy something nice for your family. The guard looked confused, but put the money back in his pocket. He did not understand yet. None of them did. A young woman pushed her way through the crowd. She was maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and glasses that had slipped down her nose. She was breathing hard, like she had been running. In her hand she held a phone, and on the screen was a photograph. She held it up next to the old man's face, her eyes going wide. Oh my God, she whispered. Then louder. Oh my God, I knew it. I knew I recognized that style. You're him, aren't you? The crowd around them fell silent. People leaned in, trying to hear what was happening. The old man looked at the young woman with an expression that was hard to read. Resignation, maybe? Or acceptance? Like he had known this moment was coming and had been waiting for it. I think you must be mistaken, he said quietly. I am just an old man who likes to play piano. But the young woman was shaking her head, her eyes still wide, her hand trembling as she held up the phone. No. I'm not mistaken. I'm a music student. I study at the conservatory. I've watched videos of your performances 100 times. That technique, that interpretation, the way you phrase the melodic lines, it's unmistakable. You're him. You're the pianist who disappeared, a murmur went through the crowd. People pulled out their phones and started searching. The words famous pianist disappeared were typed into dozens of search engines at once. The old man said nothing. He just sat there on the bench, his plastic bag in his lap, his weathered face impossible to read. Who? Someone in the crowd asked. Who is he?" The young woman turned to address them, her voice rising with excitement and disbelief. "He was one of the greatest concert pianists of his generation. He performed at Carnegie Hall, at the Royal Albert Hall, at the Sydney Opera House. Critics said he was a genius. They compared him to the legends, and then, about 15 years ago, he just vanished. Canceled all his concerts, stopped recording, disappeared from public life completely. Nobody knew what happened to him. Some people thought he had died. Some thought he had lost his mind. He just vanished." She turned back to face the man, her eyes searching his face for confirmation. "Everyone thought you were gone forever. What happened to you? Where have you been all these years?" The crowd pressed closer, hungry for answers. This was no longer just a heartwarming moment in a train station. This was a mystery. This was a story. This was something they could tell their friends and their families and their coworkers for. Years to come, the old man was quiet for a long moment. He looked down at his hands, those remarkable hands that had created such beauty just minutes ago. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft that people had to strain to hear him. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "a person needs to step away from the world. Sometimes the music becomes too much. Not the playing of it, but everything around it. The fame, the pressure, the expectations. Everyone wanting something from you. Everyone having an opinion about who you should be and how you should play and what you should do with your gift." He paused, his eyes distant, lost in memories that stretched back years and years. "I loved the music. I always loved the music. But I lost myself in everything else. So I walked away. I gave it all up. I needed to find out who I was without the concert halls and the applause and the reviews. I needed to remember why I started playing in the first place." The crowd was absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that busy train station. Everyone was hanging on his every word. "And did you?" the young woman asked softly. "Did you find what you were looking for?" The old man looked up at her, and for the first time a real smile spread across his face. Not the small, shy smile from before, a real one, warm and genuine and full of peace. "Yes," he said, "I did, and now I play for myself, for the love of it. In train stations and parks and street corners, for people who do not know my name or my history, just for the music, just for the joy of it." He reached down and patted the side of the old piano like it was a dear friend. "This is what I was always meant to do. Not the fame, not the glory, just this. Sharing music with strangers, reminding people that beauty can show up anywhere, anytime, when you least expect it." The young woman had tears streaming down her face now. So did half the people in the crowd. The teenager who had apologized earlier was openly crying. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. Something remarkable had happened in this train station. Something none of them would ever forget. But the story was not over yet. The news spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the videos that people had recorded were being uploaded to every social media platform imaginable. Texts were being sent. Calls were being made. The story of the homeless-looking man who turned out to be a legendary pianist was racing across the internet faster than anyone could have predicted. The crowd in the train station had not thinned at all. If anything, it had grown larger. People who heard what was happening from friends or saw the first posts appearing online rushed over to see for themselves. The area around the piano was now packed so tightly that station staff had to start redirecting foot traffic through alternative routes. The old man remained seated on the bench, looking slightly bewildered by all the attention. He had spent 15 years avoiding exactly this kind of moment. 15 years of anonymity, of peace, of playing for small crowds who had no idea who he was. And now, in the span of a few minutes, all of that had come crashing down. A reporter arrived first, a young man with a microphone and a cameraman trailing behind him. He must have been nearby covering some other story when the news broke. He pushed through the crowd with practiced efficiency, his press badge clearing a path. "Sir," he said, slightly out of breath, holding the microphone toward the old man, "is it true? Are you really the pianist who disappeared 15 years ago? The world thought you were dead. Where have you been? Why did you leave? Are you planning a comeback? The questions came rapid fire, one after another, not leaving any space for answers. The old man looked at the reporter with tired eyes. This was the part he had dreaded. This was why he had walked away in the first place. The endless questions. The cameras in his face. The complete loss of privacy that came with being someone the world wanted to know about. Before he could respond, the music student stepped forward and positioned herself between the reporter and the piano bench. "Give him some space," she said firmly. "He just played one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire, and now you're shoving a microphone in his face. Let him breathe." The reporter looked annoyed but stepped back slightly. The cameraman kept filming. More media began to arrive. Another news crew. Then another. Someone had apparently called the major networks because suddenly there were vans with satellite dishes pulling up outside the station. Photographers with long lenses pushed through the crowd, their cameras clicking constantly. The security guard who had apologized earlier tried to maintain some order, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with his hands. He called for backup on his radio, his voice stressed and urgent. Through all of this, the old man sat quietly. He watched the chaos unfold around him with an expression that was hard to read. Sadness, maybe? Or acceptance. Like a man watching a storm roll in, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. An older woman in an expensive coat pushed her way through the crowd. She was maybe 60, with silver hair perfectly styled and jewelry that sparkled under the station lights. When she saw the man at the piano, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears. "It is you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "After all these years, it really is you." The old man looked at her, and something changed in his face. Recognition, memory, a door opening to a past he had closed long ago. "Hello," he said softly. "It has been a long time." The woman moved closer, ignoring the cameras and the reporters and the watching crowd. She stopped right in front of him, looking down at his weathered face, his tattered coat, his worn-out shoes. "We searched for you," she said, her voice breaking. "For years we searched. We hired investigators. We contacted police in a dozen countries. We never stopped looking. We never stopped hoping you were alive somewhere." The old man's eyes glistened. "I know," he said. "I am sorry. I could not. I was not ready. I needed time." 15 years, she said. 15 years without a word. We thought you were dead. I thought I had lost you forever. The crowd had gone absolutely silent. Everyone was watching this reunion, sensing that it was something deeply personal and profound. The reporters had stopped shouting questions. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in more quietly, as if respecting the gravity of the moment. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "His sister," another voice answered. "I read about her in an article years ago. She managed his career before he disappeared." The woman reached out and took her brother's hands in hers. She held them tightly, like she was afraid he might vanish again if she'd let go. "Where did you go?" she asked. "What happened to you? Why did you leave without telling anyone?" The old man was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with years of unspoken words. "I broke," he said simply. "The pressure, the expectations, the constant performing. Every concert had to be perfect. Every review had to be glowing. Every audience had to be amazed. I forgot why I loved music in the first place. It became a job, a burden, a prison made of applause." He looked down at the piano keys, running his fingers lightly over them without pressing down. "I woke up one morning and I could not do it anymore. I could not face another concert hall. Another interview. Another critic telling me what I should have done differently. So I packed a small bag and I left. I walked away from everything. The money, all the fame. The career, all of it." His sister's tears were flowing freely now. She did not try to stop them. "But where did you go? How did you live?" "Everywhere," he said. "Nowhere. I traveled. I worked odd jobs. I slept in shelters and on park benches, and in the spare rooms of kind strangers. I played on street corners for coins. I taught piano lessons to children in small towns for food and a place to sleep. I lived simply, more simply than I ever had before. He looked up at her, and there was something bright in his eyes, something that looked almost like joy. And I found something I had lost. I found the love again, the pure love of music, without the pressure, without the expectations, without the critics and the managers and the agents and the endless demands. Just me and the piano, just the notes and the feeling. That is what I needed. That is what I have had for 15 years. And I have been happier than I ever was before. His sister shook her head slowly, trying to understand. But you were at the top of the world. You had everything. Fame, fortune, the admiration of millions. How could you be happier, living like this? She gestured at his tattered clothes, his plastic bag, his worn appearance. The old man smiled gently. Those things you mention, fame, fortune, admiration, they are not the same as happiness. They look like happiness from the outside, but on the inside, they can feel like chains. I was a prisoner in a golden cage. Now I am free. Poor by the world's standards, yes, but free. And free is worth more than gold. The crowd listened in stunned silence. These were not the words they expected from a man they had pitied just an hour ago. This was not a tragedy. This was a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice to leave behind everything most people spend their lives chasing. A young man near the back of the crowd, maybe in his 20s, spoke up. His voice was uncertain, almost shy. But don't you miss it? The concerts? The audiences? Playing in those beautiful halls? The old man considered the question carefully. I miss some things, he admitted. I miss the sound of a truly great piano. I miss the acoustics of a concert hall built specifically for music. I miss the feeling of playing with a full orchestra, of being part of something larger than myself. He paused, looking around at the crowd gathered in the dirty train station, at the old upright piano with its chipped keys and slightly out-of-tune notes. But I do not miss the rest of it. And what I have gained is worth more than what I have lost. I have gained peace. I have gained freedom. I have gained the ability to play for the pure joy of it, without worrying about reviews or ticket sales or whether my interpretation matches what the critics expect. He placed his hands on the piano keys again, pressing down gently to produce a soft chord. And I have gained moments like this one, the chance to surprise people, to bring beauty to unexpected places, to remind strangers that magic can happen anywhere if you are open to it. His sister was still holding his hand, still crying, but there was something different in her tears now. Understanding, maybe. Or acceptance. Will you come home? She asked softly. Will you let us be part of your life again? The old man looked at her for a long moment. The cameras were rolling. The crowd was watching. The world was waiting for his answer, and he smiled. The old man held his sister's gaze for what felt like an eternity. The entire station seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Reporters leaned in with their microphones. Cameras zoomed closer. Strangers who had stumbled into this moment stood frozen, desperate to hear what he would say next. Finally, he spoke. I will not go back to the life I had before, he said gently but firmly. That life nearly destroyed me. I cannot return to the concert tours and the recording contracts and the endless pressure. That chapter is closed. His sister's face fell slightly, but he squeezed her hand and continued. But that does not mean I want to disappear again. I have spent 15 years running, hiding, keeping myself apart from everyone who loved me, because I was afraid that letting them back in would mean letting the old life back in too. That was wrong of me. That was selfish. And I am sorry. He reached up with his free hand and wiped a tear from her cheek. I would like to know my family again. I would like to be part of your life if you will still have me. Not as the famous pianist. Not as the name on concert programs. Just as your brother. Just as the man I have become. His sister let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She threw her arms around him, holding him tightly, not caring about the cameras or the crowd or anything else in the world. "Of course," she whispered into his shoulder. "Of course I will have you. I never stop loving you." Not for one single day. The crowd erupted into applause. This time, it was different from before. Warmer somehow. More personal. They were not just clapping for a performance. They were clapping for a reunion. For a family finding each other again after 15 years of separation. For a moment of pure human connection in a world that often felt cold and disconnected. The old man held his sister for a long time. When they finally pulled apart, both of their faces were wet with tears, but they were smiling. Really smiling? The kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep inside. The young music student who had recognized him stepped forward again. She had been hanging back during the reunion, not wanting to intrude, but now she approached with a hesitant expression. "Psst, I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but I have to ask. You said you won't go back to your old life. I understand that. I respect that. But would you ever consider playing again? Not the concert tours, not the pressure, just playing. Sharing your gift with people who would give anything to hear you." The old man looked at her thoughtfully. "I never stop playing," he said. "I play every day. In train stations, in parks, on street corners, wherever there is a piano and someone willing to listen." "But what about teaching?" she pressed. "What about passing on what you know? There are students like me who have studied your recordings for years, who have tried to understand how you do what you do. The world lost so much when you disappeared. Not just your performances, but everything you could have taught the next generation." The old man was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly, watching the joints move. "Teaching," he repeated softly like he was tasting the word. "I have not thought about that in a long time." The music student pressed on, sensing an opening. "There are conservatories that would give anything to have you. Students who would travel across the world just to study with you for a single day. You could share everything you've learned. Not just the technique, but the philosophy, the approach, the soul of it." The old man looked up at her, and there was something new in his eyes. A spark of interest that had not been there before. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "perhaps there is a way to give back without losing myself again. Perhaps I could teach a few students. The ones who truly love the music, not just the fame it might bring them." The student's face lit up with hope. "Would you consider taking me as a student?" she asked. "I don't have much money. I work 2 jobs just to pay for my studies. But I would do anything. I would work for you. I would clean your house. I would do whatever it takes." The old man smiled at her passion. It reminded him of himself many decades ago, when music was still new and exciting and full of infinite possibility. "We will talk," he said. "Not today. Today has been overwhelming. But find me when things settle down, and we will talk about what might be possible." The student nodded eagerly, tears of gratitude in her eyes. By now, the story had spread far beyond the train station. The videos had gone viral. Millions of people around the world were watching clips of the performance, of the reunion, of the old man's words about freedom and happiness and the true meaning of success. News channels were running the story on repeat. Social media was exploding with reactions, but something unexpected was happening too. The old man's message was resonating with people in a way that went beyond just an interesting news story. His words about walking away from success to find happiness, his choice to live simply and find joy in small moments, his rejection of fame and fortune in favor of peace and purpose. These ideas were striking a chord with millions of people who felt trapped in their own lives, chasing goals that never seemed to bring fulfillment. Messages poured in from around the world. People shared their own stories of burnout and exhaustion, of feeling lost, despite having everything society said they should want, of dreaming about walking away but being too afraid to actually do it. The old man had become more than just a pianist. He had become a symbol, a reminder that there was another way to live. In the train station, the crowd had finally begun to thin. The reporters had gotten their interviews. The cameras had captured their footage. Station staff were gently encouraging people to move along and let normal service resume. The old man stood up from the piano bench, his plastic bag in hand. His sister stood beside him, her arm linked through his, unwilling to let him out of her sight. The security guard, who had been ready to throw him out hours ago, approached one last time. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I just want you to know what happened here today. What you played. What you said. It changed something in me. I've been working this job for 12 years, and I've become so good at judging people by how they look. Too good, I forgot that everyone has a story. Everyone has something inside them that I can't see from the outside." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I'm going to try to be better, to see people differently, to give them a chance before I decide who they are. You taught me that today, and I won't forget it." The old man reached out and placed a hand on the guard's shoulder. "That is the best gift you could give me," he said. "Better than any standing ovation. Better than any award. If one person sees the world differently because of today, then it was all worth it." He looked around the station one last time, at the old piano that had started everything, at the spot where the teenagers had stood laughing, at the place where he had sat down as a nobody and stood up as something else entirely. "You know," he said softly, almost to himself, "I came here today just wanting to play. That is all. Just wanting to feel the keys under my fingers and lose myself in the music for a little while. I did not expect any of this." His sister smiled at him. "Maybe that is why it happened," she said. "Maybe the most beautiful things happen when we are not trying to make them happen. When we just show up and offer what we have and let the universe do the rest." The old man nodded slowly. There was wisdom in that. Together they walked toward the station exit. The crowd parted for them, people nodding respectfully, some reaching out just to touch his arm or whisper words of thanks. He acknowledged each one with a gentle smile. At the door he stopped and turned back one final time. The piano sat there in the corner, old and battered and slightly out of tune. Just an ordinary piano in an ordinary train station. But today it had been the stage for something extraordinary. He raised his hand in a small wave. A goodbye to the piano. A goodbye to this moment. A hello to whatever came next. Then he stepped out into the cold London afternoon, his sister at his side, walking into a future that was uncertain but full of possibility. Behind him, the station slowly returned to normal. Trains arrived and departed. Commuters rushed past. The piano sat silent, waiting for the next person to come along and give it a voice. But everyone who had been there that day carried something with them as they left. A memory, a lesson, a reminder that the world is full of hidden wonders, if only we have the eyes to see them. And somewhere out there, an old man in a tattered coat was walking through the streets of London, free and at peace. Already thinking about the next piano he would find, the next strangers he would surprise, the next moment of unexpected beauty he would create, because that, in the end, was what he had been put on this earth to do. Not to be famous, not to be rich, not to be admired by millions, just to play, just to share, just to remind people that magic is real and it can show up anywhere, anytime. In anyone, even in someone the world had already decided to ignore.